The bull collapsed unexpectedly in front of the bus, bringing everything to a halt. But then the driver realized the heartbreaking truth behind why. What happens next will leave you speechless. The bus shuddered as Thomas Ellard slammed both feet on the brake, the tires screaming against the damp asphalt. The morning fog was so thick it clung to the windshield like smeared paint, but there was no mistaking the massive black shape that had suddenly lurched into the road. The animal staggered once, twice, then collapsed directly in front of the bus, its legs folding beneath it with a heavy, hollow thud. The impact of the brakes threw some passengers forward in their seats. A metal lunchbox clattered to the floor, and someone in the back muttered in irritation. Thomas gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles blanched, his pulse pounding in his ears. His first thought was that it was just another stray farm animal. He'd seen cows and sheep wander into the road before, but this was different. This bull was massive, its dark hide glistening with moisture, its sides rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. Steam puffed from its nostrils in short bursts, and its eyes, wide, dark, and strangely alert, were not fixed on the bus at all. They were darting, almost frantically, toward the dense wall of fog-wrapped trees to the right of the road. The bus was quiet except for the hiss of the air brakes and the faint ticking of the cooling engine. A few passengers groaned, clearly impatient. "It's just a bull, Tom," one of the factory workers called out from the middle row. His voice was light, but it carried the edge of someone eager to get on with their day. "Honk the horn and get it moving." Thomas didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the animal, his instincts telling him something was wrong. Even in the pale, shifting fog, he noticed the way the bull's hooves scraped against the road, not in aimless discomfort, but in short, deliberate kicks, almost like it was signaling. Its ears twitched toward the woods, catching sounds Thomas couldn't yet hear. From the back, a low, surprised voice cut through the murmurs. "That's Ashram," the man said, his tone heavy with recognition. Thomas turned slightly and saw Elias Cord pushing himself out of his seat. Elias was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, a farmer who had worked nearly every acre of the valley at some point in his life. His weathered face, framed by a salt and pepper beard, was hard to read, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes. "You know him?" Thomas asked, his voice steady but his stomach tightening. Elias stepped down the aisle, his boots thumping softly against the floor. "Everyone knows Ashram," he replied. "Strongest bull in Wexford Valley, stubborn as stone. Never seen him like this." Ashram lay in the center of the road, sides heaving, his body twitching with restrained tension. His head shifted slightly, and for a moment, Thomas swore the animal looked directly at him, then back to the tree line again, like urging him to see something he could not. The factory worker in the middle row scoffed. "He's just tired, that's all. Must have gotten loose." "No," Elias said firmly, crouching near the bus's front door to get a better look through the glass. "This bull doesn't collapse for no reason." Thomas's gaze drifted to the right. The fog hung heavy over the trees, the pale light of dawn breaking in thin streaks between trunks. Then, faintly, something moved, a flicker of darker shadow against the gray mist. His heartbeat slowed, then quickened again, a deep unease threading through his chest. "Elias," he said quietly, "do you see that?" The farmer squinted, leaning a hand on the doorframe. "Something's there." His voice had dropped, as though even speaking too loud might invite trouble. Another passenger shifted restlessly. "What's the holdup? We've got places to be." Thomas ignored him. Every instinct in him, the kind that had kept him safe through snowstorms, flooded roads, and mechanical failures, told him not to move the bus forward. He kept his foot firm on the brake, the engine idling in a low growl. Ashram kicked at the ground again, his hooves striking the pavement with a hollow, warning thud. The sound was oddly rhythmic, almost purposeful. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He didn't know what the bull was warning them about, but he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on the bus like a held breath. From somewhere deep in the woods came a faint sound, a metallic clink, soft but unmistakable in the morning stillness. Thomas's chest tightened, but the noise vanished as quickly as it had come. He looked again at the tree line, but the fog swallowed everything beyond a few meters. Elias glanced over his shoulder toward the passengers. "Stay in your seats," he said, his tone clipped. He turned back to Thomas. "You did right stopping. Don't move until we know what we're dealing with." The bull's flanks rose and fell, his breath visible in quick bursts. His gaze didn't waver from the trees, and Thomas realized that whatever had brought Ashram here had shaken him badly. This was no random escape from a pasture. Something, or someone, had driven him into the road. The bus's windshield wipers squeaked once, smearing condensation across the glass. The mist outside seemed to thicken, making the space between the bull and the trees feel like a narrow, dangerous corridor. Thomas's grip on the wheel tightened. He had no clear idea what was ahead, but he knew with sudden, unshakable certainty that moving forward now would be a mistake he could never undo. He took a slow breath, his eyes flicking between ashram and the tree line, the weight of the passengers' stares pressing on him. Somewhere out there, unseen, something was waiting, and he didn't know it yet, but stopping the bus had just prevented them from driving into something far worse than a road obstruction. Thomas pulled the bus door open with a deliberate, measured motion, the hiss of the air brake mingling with the cold rush of morning air that swept in. The chill bit at his cheeks, and the sharp scent of wet earth and animal musk filled his nostrils. His gaze stayed fixed on Ashram, who lay sprawled in the middle of the road, flanks rising and falling with labored breaths. The bull's massive head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as if tasting the air, but his eyes never strayed from the fog-wrapped tree line. Elias stepped down onto the damp road without hesitation, his heavy boots sinking slightly into the softened gravel. "We'll get him up, move him off the road," he muttered, his deep voice almost drowned by the steady hum of the idling engine behind them. His tone carried the casual certainty of a man used to handling livestock, but that certainty faltered when he crouched beside Ashram. The farmer's hand brushed over the bull's flank, feeling the tense tremor in the muscles. His brow furrowed, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. "This isn't exhaustion. He's been driven here." The words landed heavily in Thomas's mind, the implication gnawing at him. Driven here. Not wandering. Not lost. Pushed. Before he could respond, the sound came. Faint, metallic, and deliberate. It was not the random clink of loose tools or the harmless rustle of wildlife. It was measured. A soft clink, then a muffled thud, like metal striking earth in a pattern. Once, pause. Twice, pause. Again. The rhythm was steady, purposeful, and it was moving closer through the woods. Thomas's stomach tightened. He glanced over his shoulder toward the bus. Inside, the passengers were no longer just restless. They were uneasy. A shift had gone through the group, replacing casual impatience with the kind of quiet that precedes fear. From the middle rows, a young man rose slightly from his seat, leaning forward toward the driver's chair. He was wiry and sharp-eyed, with a quickness to his movements that suggested he noticed things others missed. "I'm Mason," he said under his breath, voice low enough so the others wouldn't hear. "When you braked, I saw something shiny, up ahead in the gravel. Just for a second. Looked like metal." Thomas turned his head just enough to meet the young man's eyes. "Shiny?" he asked quietly, though the answer was already forming in the back of his mind. Mason nodded once, the set of his jaw making him seem older than he was. "Didn't look like a coin or anything. It was fixed. Buried." Elias, still crouched beside Ashram, stiffened at the words. Before Thomas could climb down to look for himself, movement in the tree line caught his attention again. The shadows weren't shifting with the wind this time. They were taking shape. One by one, 4 figures emerged from the mist-draped woods. They moved with a strange mix of caution and intent, each carrying something. Long-handled tools, heavy canvas sacks. Their faces were hidden behind cloth coverings tied at the back of their heads, leaving only their eyes visible. Elias rose to his feet slowly, his voice low but edged with certainty. "That's no hunting gear." Thomas's gaze flicked back to Ashram. The bull's ears flattened briefly, and his tail gave a small flick. Then his right foreleg scraped the road in a weak but deliberate kick. The sound was sharp against the quiet morning. His gaze stayed locked, not on the approaching men, but on the stretch of road just in front of the bus's bumper. It clicked. The warning. The strange collapse. The unyielding position. Thomas's breath came slower now, not from calm, but from the weight of sudden understanding. The road ahead wasn't just blocked, it was dangerous. Rigged. Ashram had put himself here on purpose. But why would anyone? The thought splintered under the pressure of the moment. One of the masked men stepped forward onto the road, raising a gloved hand in a gesture that might have looked friendly if not for the tightness in his stance. "Looks like you've got a problem here," he called out, voice muffled through the cloth. "We can help you move him. Big animal like that. Could be dangerous." The man's boots crunched on the gravel as he came closer. Thomas's eyes tracked every step and froze when the man's foot landed just shy of a patch of disturbed earth. There, half hidden under grit and a veil of morning moisture, was something Mason hadn't imagined. A small, round edge of metal protruded from the ground. The man didn't step on it. Whether that was luck or intent, Thomas couldn't tell. But the fact that it was there at all sent a cold shiver through him. Inside the bus, the passengers began shifting, some leaning toward the windows, others whispering. The hum of quiet conversation was laced with a sharper, more nervous energy now. Thomas turned his head slightly toward Mason. "Get everyone down low," he murmured. "No noise." Mason's eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. He moved down the aisle, his voice low and firm, coaxing the men to crouch or slide into the spaces between seats. Some resisted at first, but one look at Mason's face and the shadows beyond the windows was enough to quell protest. Thomas's hand stayed on the door lever, not to open it further, but ready to close it if the men advanced too quickly. His gaze swept over them again. The sacks they carried hung heavily, and the tools, crowbars, shovels, looked like they'd been used hard. Elias took a half-step back toward the bus, his eyes locked on the nearest man. "Tom," he said quietly without looking away, "whatever this is, it's not for us, but we're in the middle of it." The bull shifted again, hooves scraping the road in a short, weak arc. His breath was heavier now, his body trembling with the strain of holding his position. Yet his eyes never left that spot ahead of the bus. Thomas tightened his grip on the door lever. His voice, when he spoke, was low but resolute. "Keep your head down, Elias." Because now, the picture was clear. They weren't just blocked by chance. This was deliberate. The bull wasn't the obstacle. He was the warning. And what none of them knew was that this was only the start of something much larger, something Ashram himself had been caught in the middle of. The four men from the woods moved with an unsettling calm, their steps measured, their eyes flicking between the bus and the bull sprawled in the road. The one in front raised a hand in a casual wave, his voice carrying a false warmth that didn't match the tension in his posture. "Looks like you've got yourself a roadblock," he said, the cloth over his mouth muffling his tone. "We can help you move him, get you on your way." Thomas kept one hand resting on the gear lever, the other gripping the wheel just enough to hide the tension in his fingers. His mind raced. If he refused outright, they might sense his suspicion, and that could escalate things fast. But if he agreed, he would be letting them control the situation, control that would lead them right over whatever lay buried in the gravel ahead. A third option took shape in his mind. He let his voice come out slow, edged with an irritation that seemed natural for a man whose morning route had been interrupted. "This bull's not just any stray," he said. "He belongs to a farmer in town who'll be furious if he's handled rough. Last time someone tried, they nearly lost a hand." The lead man hesitated just enough for Thomas to know he'd hit a nerve. They wanted him forward, and he was giving them a reason to stall. Elias stepped into the act without missing a beat. "I'll radio it in," he said, pulling a small handheld device from his coat. The old unit crackled to life, but instead of calling the sheriff's office as he claimed, Elias began tapping out a series of short and long bursts, a crude but effective code his cousin Jarek would recognize. Years ago, Jarek had served as a border guard, and the two had shared enough quiet hunting trips to create a shorthand for emergencies. Inside the bus, Mason kept his head low, eyes darting to the rear door. He could see the way the men outside were positioned, two closer to the bus, the others hanging back as if guarding something. He made his decision quickly. While the passengers stayed crouched, Mason slipped down the narrow aisle, his steps as light as possible on the floorboards. He eased the back door open just enough to slip through, letting it click shut behind him. The cold air bit at his skin as he crouched low and crawled under the bus. The ground was damp and gritty, and the smell of oil mixed with the earthy scent of the road. He moved on elbows and knees, keeping his profile low until he was near the front tires. Then he saw it. Thin wires running just beneath the gravel, trailing toward the boulder on the roadside. They weren't thick, but their placement was precise, too deliberate to be harmless. His eyes followed the path and found not one, but several lines branching off, disappearing toward the ditch and farther up the road. His throat tightened. This wasn't a single hazard. It was a sequence. A shadow shifted nearby. Mason froze, heart pounding. One of the masked men had spotted him. The man began walking toward the bus's side, his steps quickening as he closed the distance. Before he could get close, Ashram's head jerked up. A deep guttural roar tore from his throat, the kind that reverberated in the chest as much as in the ears. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was a challenge, a warning. The bull lunged forward on shaky legs, his horned head swinging just enough to force the man to halt his approach and glance warily at the animal. Mason didn't waste the opening. He rolled backward, scraping his elbows on the gravel, and slid back under the body of the bus. He didn't stop moving until he reached the front, then climbed up into the doorway. His breathing was sharp from both exertion and what he'd seen. He leaned in close to Thomas, his voice low and urgent. "Wires, multiple. They lead to something behind the boulder, probably more on the sides. This isn't random. They've got it all set up." Thomas's jaw tightened. His suspicion had just been confirmed, and the reality was worse than he had imagined. "What's it for?" he asked. "Not for us," Mason said, glancing toward the men in the road. "For something bigger. This looks like an ambush." Elias had stopped tapping his code and was now standing just inside the bus, his face grim. Thomas's mind pieced it together. Monday mornings, the route, the isolated bend. There was only one regular vehicle besides his bus that came through here on Mondays. An armored truck from the city bank, its run timed and predictable. They were expecting the truck, Thomas murmured, more to himself than anyone else. We just got here first. Ashram had planted himself in the perfect position to block the path. Whether by instinct or something else, Thomas didn't yet know. But the bull's presence had saved them from rolling straight into the trap. Thomas made his choice. We back out, slowly, he told Elias. He shifted the bus into reverse, but before the tires even rolled, movement in the fog behind them froze him in place. Two more masked figures emerged from the mist, their silhouettes cutting against the pale gray morning. They carried long poles, and though their ends were wrapped in cloth, the shapes beneath looked like they could conceal more than just blunt wood. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They simply stepped into position behind the bus, one man slightly to the left, the other to the right, closing the only open escape route. Thomas's hand remained on the gear lever, but he didn't move it again. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him, inside the bus, outside on the road, even Ashram's steady, unblinking gaze. Elias shifted his stance, subtly placing himself between the doorway and the approaching men in the rear. Mason crouched low again, his eyes flicking between the front and back, calculating distances, angles, and possibilities. The masked leader tilted his head slightly, as though sensing the stalemate for what it was. His voice, when it came, was calm and almost polite. No need to rush. We'll get you moving soon enough. Thomas didn't reply. His mind was a rapid churn of scenarios, each one carrying risks he couldn't afford. The road ahead was deadly. The road behind was blocked, and they were surrounded by men who were armed not with the intent to rob a bus, but to bring down something far heavier. It was a standoff, and one wrong move could doom them all. The low rumble came first, faint but unmistakable against the cold morning air. It was the sound of a large engine, steady and heavy, cutting through the fog from somewhere beyond the bend. Thomas's chest tightened instantly. He knew that sound. It was the armored vehicle the attackers had been waiting for. The masked men's heads turned in unison toward the direction of the noise. Their casual facade evaporated, replaced by urgency. The leader stepped forward, voice sharp now, no more pretenses. Move the bus, now! Thomas kept both hands on the wheel, his knuckles pale but his gaze unflinching. Not until the bull's off the road, he said, tone even but immovable. One of the men to the left swore under his breath and started forward, while another reached into the sack slung over his shoulder. Thomas's mind raced. If they forced him forward, the bus would roll straight into the traps Mason had seen. If they realized their plan was compromised, they could turn their aggression on the passengers. Behind him, Elias stood at the bus's steps, one foot braced on the metal frame, his radio still in hand. He kept his voice low but firm. Jarek's coming, he said, his eyes never leaving the attackers. He's not alone. The distant roar of a second engine confirmed it. Jarek had gotten the message. Somewhere out there he was closing in, bringing whatever help he could muster. But they needed to hold out for just a little longer. The tension on the road was razor thin when Ashram moved. With a groaning effort, the bull shifted his weight and pushed himself up onto trembling legs. His breath came in short bursts, steam curling from his nostrils in the frigid air. Every muscle in his massive frame quivered, but he stood. Slowly, his head turned toward the lead attacker. The man, focused on Thomas, didn't see it at first. But when the ground shuddered faintly beneath Ashram's first staggering step, his eyes darted to the bull and widened. Ashram took another step, his hooves clapping hard against the gravel, each movement slow but deliberate. Then, with a sudden burst of strength, he lunged. His horn caught the man square in the side, not impaling but driving the full force of the bull's weight into him. The attacker stumbled backward, arms flailing, and his boot slammed directly onto the patch of gravel Mason had warned about. The explosion was immediate, a sharp, deafening blast that split the air and sent a spray of dirt, rock, and smoke skyward. The sound bounced off the hills, echoing like thunder. The masked men dove for cover, some throwing themselves behind the boulder, others scrambling toward the ditch. The carefully laid wires had been tripped prematurely, and the chain of charges hidden along the road sent bursts of smoke and debris tearing through their ambush site. Thomas ducked instinctively, his hands still gripping the wheel, ears ringing. The passengers inside huddled lower, eyes wide, the shock of the blast sinking in. Through the haze, the growl of an engine rose to a screeching pitch as Jarek's battered truck barreled into view, skidding sideways to a stop just behind the bus. 3 men jumped out, Jarek in front, tall and broad-shouldered, with 2 others from the village close behind. They carried what they had managed to grab in a hurry, thick wooden poles, a length of chain, and an old hunting spear. "Get them away from the road!" Jarek shouted, pointing toward the attackers now dazed and disoriented from the blast. The three villagers charged forward, weapons swinging. One attacker tried to rise, but a heavy swing from Jarek's chain wrapped around his arm and yanked him to the ground. Another was driven back toward the ditch, where Elias met him halfway, tackling him with the weight of a man who'd spent his life working the land. Thomas shifted the bus into reverse, the tires crunching over gravel as they began inching backward. Mason knelt by the doorway, scanning the sides for any remaining threats. Ashram stood near the edge of the road now, sides heaving but still upright. Elias, panting from the scuffle, moved quickly to the bull's side, patting his neck with rough hands. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice softer than Thomas had ever heard it. With Mason's help, they coaxed Ashram toward the grassy verge, leading him away from the damaged section of road. The bull's gait was uneven, but he moved willingly, as though he understood the danger was not yet gone. By the time the bus had reversed far enough to be clear of the traps, Jarek and his men had the remaining attackers pinned and disarmed, smoke still curled from the blast site, the sharp tang of scorched earth hanging heavy in the air. Only when they were a safe distance back did Thomas let out the breath he'd been holding. His hands trembled slightly on the wheel, the adrenaline ebbing. In the days that followed, the story unfolded piece by piece. The attackers had forced Ashram from his pen, driving him toward the road to serve as a living distraction for their ambush. They'd counted on him blocking the armored truck's path, giving them time to strike. But they hadn't anticipated the bull collapsing exactly where their first trap was hidden, nor that his stubborn stand would stop an entirely different vehicle. A week later, Thomas made the quiet walk up the gravel path to Elias's farm. The fields were still wet from an early rain, the smell of damp hay lingering in the air. Ashram stood in a fenced pasture, his black coat glistening faintly under the weak sun. Thomas leaned on the fence rail, a small sack of apples in hand. One by one he offered them, letting the bull take each with a slow, deliberate crunch. His free hand reached up to brush the coarse hair along Ashram's neck. "You knew," Thomas said quietly, almost to himself. The bull blinked slowly in return, chewing with steady calm. The ambush was foiled, the attackers arrested, and the armored vehicle rerouted. But in the valley, the story that spread was simpler. Ashram had stopped a bus to save the men on board. And for Thomas, that was the truth worth remembering. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of animal welfare, unexpected moments of crisis, and the profound empathy that can emerge in difficult situations. This narrative aims to raise awareness about the vulnerability of animals and inspire a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of all life.